If you know me, then you know I love me some DC comics. Don't get me wrong, I love Marvel comics too, especially when it comes to films. But there's just something about the heroes from DC that really hold a special place in my heart. Like, that's for real the shit I grew up on, man. From shows like Teen Titans, Justice League Unlimited, Batman Beyond, Static Shock, and obviously, if you know me, Young Justice, to those CW shows like Flash and Arrow, before they both got really fucking bad. I don't know, man. There's just something about the world of DC that just really sticked with me for most of my life. And it's probably why I'm such a big fan of comic books till this day. And yet, even with all that in mind, for most of my life, I just wasn't that big of a Superman fan. It's not like I hated him or something. I can't even really explain it. He just didn't click for me growing up. I guess I just didn't really understand him. That was until pretty recently. Like I said, I grew up on DC Comics. Hell, most of those shows even had Superman in them. I rewatched Justice League during lockdown, and it still holds up incredibly well. But honestly, the only thing I remember from that show when I was a kid was Superman literally getting his shit rocked by every villain the team came across, especially in those early seasons. And yeah, he was in Young Justice as well, but honestly, he wasn't that big of a part of that show. And when he was there, especially in season 1, bro was too busy being a deadbeat father to do anything productive.
You are hiding a child, let that boy come home.
It'd be one thing if I was the only person that felt this strange, weird disconnect with Superman, you know, because
I'm weird. I'm a weirdo.
But I feel like a lot of people had this weird disconnect with Superman up until generally pretty recently, and it's 100% DC Comics' fault for how they characterized him during the 2010s. A lot of what the general audiences associate with Superman comes from Christopher Reeve's version of the character, but as the interests of audiences and the stories told to them darkened and evolved with the times, that optimistic Boy Scout version of Soup seemingly became outdated in the eyes of a lot of people. In the decades since then, a lot of the general audiences have perceived Superman as too perfect, too powerful, and too much of a Boy Scout, and oftentimes unfairly compare him to his more grounded and relatable peer Batman, as well as other more modern depictions of heroes that became to rise to prominence. Unfortunately, to the eyes of the higher-ups at DC, Superman just didn't fit the mold as to what the general audiences started to associate with heroes, which kinda led to DC attempting to overly course-correct the perception of him in all media. After bum-ass Barry Allen went back in time and ruined everything in 2011's Flashpoint, DC Comics rebooted their entire comic book universe, you know, besides Batman, with an initiative called the New 52 to appeal to new readers. I would say that the New 52 succeeded, at least at first. It did in fact get a lot of new readers into reading comics, including myself, but it was at the cost of a lot of the history and legacies of their characters, most notably Superman. Superman's entire character was reworked from the ground up. His parents, dead. His relationship with Lois Lane, erased. He was younger, angrier, darker, and less emotionally grounded. Don't get me wrong, this version of Superman wasn't hated by everyone. I mean, this was a Superman in the first comic I ever actually read, but it was clear that DC was trying to manufacture edge for a character who was never supposed to need it. And in doing so, they lost what actually made him unique. And it wasn't even just a comic book thing. The entire premise of like maybe the biggest DC game ever, Injustice, centers around Superman turning into an evil fascist tyrant after the Joker kills Lois Lane and his unborn child. And how could we forget to mention... Honestly, there's quite a lot I could say about Zack Snyder's interpretation of the DC universe and its characters, like probably enough to make its own video, so I'll try to hopefully keep this part brief. But Zack Snyder's depiction of Superman might actually be the epitome of everything wrong with Superman during this era in the eyes of the general audience. Snyder approached Superman like a mythic figure, a conflicted god burdened by his power, unsure of his place in the world. The tone of Man of Steel was quite bleak and somber, and the world was pretty damn cynical. But it had its bright spots, and I liked it well enough as a 13-year-old. You know, besides that god-awful ending. Batman v Superman was a different story though. Again, I'll try to keep this part tailored just to Superman in this film, even though his depiction of Batman might have actually been worse than his Superman. Most of the criticisms people had for Man of Steel, Snyder basically doubled down on in this film. Throughout the course of the film, Superman is essentially an object of political fear, draped in religious imagery and premonitions of him becoming evil. He rarely even talked during the film. It was an incredibly reactionary character. Honestly, he was more of a threat in this film than an actual hero. And then he fucking died at the end, so. I vividly remember leaving what was probably my most anticipated film ever at the time, so disappointed, just thinking to myself, damn, I should have just watched Deadpool. But I mean, credit where credit's due. The idea of a godlike being coming down to our world and seeing how the world reacts to him and how he attempts to become more human is quite an interesting concept if you detach it from Superman. Problem is, it doesn't really work for the character of Superman because Superman's inherently human. Like, bro was literally raised here his entire life. But despite this version of Superman not really catching on with most audiences, minus a very vocal minority, the idea of a morally ambiguous or evil Superman really started to become more popular among audiences, with characters of this trope like Homelander, Omni-Man, Brightburn, Sentry, and more just becoming more normalized in the general zeitgeist. What used to be a pretty novel twist to the character is more or less the standard these days. But I guess with all this talking about what Superman isn't, it sort of begs the question, what is Superman supposed to be? Well, for one, despite all the religious and Jesus imagery that Mr. Snyder placed within his films, Superman is not a god. In a lot of ways, Superman's more human than most of us. Bro's low-key just a regular guy trying to do his best to do some good in this world, with an added helping of some superpowers. He possesses all the power in the world and could so easily destroy or conquer Earth if he really wanted to. And yet, because of how he was raised, through the core values and lessons taught to him by his parents, that's not even a thought in the back of his head. I think the moment that Superman clicked for me was when I read the Superman Rebirth run from 2016 to 2018. Like I said, after bum-ass Barry Allen ruined everything by creating the New 52,
Bing bong!
they overhauled Superman from the ground up. However, this version of Superman didn't really connect much with readers, especially longtime ones. So they killed him. Through some convoluted multiverse timeline bullshit, they replaced him with the Superman from before the New 52. He was older, wiser, married to Lois again, and for the first time ever, a father, thanks to the introduction of his son John. We saw the entire family attempting to adjust to essentially an entirely new world, as Clark tried to prioritize his family and instill the lessons his parents taught him to his son while balancing being the world's greatest hero. And we saw it all through the eyes of basically a 10-year-old. And suddenly, Superman wasn't just this all-powerful symbol, he was actually relatable. In a lot of ways, Superman's kind of morally and physically incorruptible. Which honestly doesn't seem like it'd make for that interesting of stories, but I think what makes for the best Superman stories aren't just ones that test him physically, but ones that challenge him ideologically. So often when we think of Superman stories, we think of him being outdated or soft in his approach to saving the day, especially when compared to other heroes who are more willing to go to violence or kill. But that Superman approach is needed sometimes, and in a lot of ways it's probably more poignant now than ever. There's this kind of old story from Superman 775, as well as the film based on it called Superman vs. the Elite, that tackles this exact idea of Superman's approach to heroism being outdated. It was a direct response to the rise of anti-heroes and more violent vigilantes who are willing to kill. In it, the entire world gets behind a new superhero team known as the Elite, and their violent approach to delivering justice. And even with the entire world turning their backs on him, Superman stays true to his morals and shows why no one man should have the power to be judge, jury, and executioner, and how scary it would be if someone was actually allowed to. Superman is a deliberate rejection of that cynicism in a world obsessed with realism and morally ambiguous heroes. For a pretty decent portion of my life, Superman was just that one DC character that I really couldn't connect with. But what I've realized now that I'm older, wiser, and better looking is that the issue wasn't actually Superman, but instead how he was framed to me. In such a shitty, cynical world, Superman stands as an unshakable symbol of hope and idealism. He's not a god stoically walking this planet with us pathetic humans. He's a reminder of the best that Earth has to offer. He reminds us to look out for each other, to believe in better even when it's hard. And that's probably one of the main reasons I'm so hyped for James Gunn's new Superman film. One of the earliest things I remember Gunn saying about this film was that this version of Superman is a kind person in a world that sees kindness as old-fashioned. And Gunn definitely has the track record with comic properties for me to take him at his word. James Gunn has shown time and time again that he knows how to perfectly combine heart, emotion, and humor. Hell, he made the masses cry tears for a CGI raccoon. And ask like anyone that knows me, but I've been screaming for David Cornsquid to play Superman from the moment I watched Hollywood during lockdown. Obviously I haven't seen the film as of time of recording this script, but everything they've released about this film so far makes me believe that DC isn't trying to fix Superman for the likes of the general audience, but instead embracing him for what makes him Superman. Hope, optimism, heart. For the first time in a long time, it feels like we're actually getting a Superman who can actually believe in people again. I used to think Superman was just this boring, perfect guy flying around in his underwear and a cape, but now I see him for what he really is. A man who could do anything and chooses to do good every single day without needing a thank you, without giving up, even when it hurts. And in a time on Earth full of division and fear, one where kindness and compassion are disregarded and mocked, the idea that Superman, a literal immigrant from a destroyed planet, can look and see all the worst parts of the world on a daily basis and still chooses to fight for all the small good things in it, I don't know. I guess that kind of puts a smile on my face. Superman isn't boring or outdated. He's the original, the standard that not only other heroes strive to reach, but what we humans should strive towards when we look at tomorrow. And if James Gunn's Superman gets that right, then maybe a whole new generation will finally understand what it took me so long to see. Appreciate all you guys once again for making it to the end of this and for being forced to listen to me nerd out about a drawing of a dude flying around in his underwear for like 12 minutes. This is like the first time in like maybe 15 years where I'm not at least a little bit embarrassed to be a DC fan. So obviously I'm a little more than hyped for the new film. But I guess like, comment, and subscribe. Let's continue this conversation down below, and we'll all find out if James Gunn and crew can stick this landing on the next episode of Dragon Ball Z.